Hi, everyone. My name's Natalie Draisin with the FIA Foundation. Thank you so much for coming. You've probably been sitting a lot today, so please, let's stand. Thank you. Now, unless you've been living and working in this hotel for the last couple days, which is entirely possible, you've probably been outside. You've walked, cycled, or maybe even driven. And I see that you had a good trip because you're here. But for many, that wasn't the case. Have you ever been in a car crash? Do you know anyone who's been in a car crash? If so, please stay standing. If not, please sit. This is what a global epidemic looks like. We lose more people on our roads than from HIV/AIDS. And behind each one of you who's standing, there's a name. For me, it's Miriam. When we were in college, she was hit and killed while walking to school. The drunk driver had 17 DUIs. On the count of 3, I'd like you to say the name behind why you're standing. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Please sit. It's so painful to say these names, but it's so important. Because we're not talking about numbers, we're talking about lives. We're talking about my friend, your mother, your brother. And it's hard to grasp the magnitude. It's not like an act of terrorism where lots of people die at once. It's one death here and one there. But if we continue with the status quo, road traffic will cost us 26 times more than terrorism between now and 2030. What's an acceptable number of deaths on the roads? Is it 1 million, well over 1 million per year, the way it currently is? What if it was your loved one? What if it was your child? There's perhaps nothing more tragic than a child's life cut short. Imagine if every day of every year, 10 school buses full of kids just fell off a cliff. If this happened in reality, it would make headlines. The leading killer of people ages 5 to 29 around the world isn't war, drugs, or suicide. It's road crashes. The US is not immune. We lose more 5 to 24-year-olds on our roads than from any other cause. But I won't volunteer my kid to be a statistic, and you shouldn't have to either. The only acceptable number is 0. 0 sounds impossible, right? That's what they said about smallpox. It's been eradicated since 1980. We can vaccinate ourselves against this epidemic on wheels. We actually don't have to wait for self-driving cars. The vaccines are here. To get to 0, we have to change our behavior and our built environment, which currently steers us in the direction of cars. That change starts with a vision focused on protecting the most vulnerable population, our youth. We call it Vision 0 for youth. To get there, we first have to change our wording a little bit in the way we think. You'll notice I've been saying crash, not accident. Accidents are random and unpreventable and unpredictable. Crashes are not. We know how to prevent them. Changing our language means changing our perception of reality. And the reality is that when cars and people share the same space, at some point they're probably going to collide. At high speeds, those crashes will probably be fatal. This is Nancy from Bogota, Colombia. Her daughter Laura walked to school. One day, while Laura was walking, she was hit by a truck. Her hip, pelvis, and femur crumpled beneath its tires. Laura was dragged down the street as the truck sped away. To care for her daughter, Nancy had to quit her job because Laura didn't die, but she may never have full use of her legs again. To survive, they rely on income from her 19-year-old son, who washes buses on an overnight shift. The family's trapped in a cycle of poverty. Unlike drivers, pedestrians don't have the protection of a metal cage. But our roads aren't built for people using the most sustainable and healthiest form of travel, our 2 legs. It's no surprise that pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists make up over half of our fatalities on the roads. When you're hit by a car going 40 miles an hour, it's like jumping off a 5-story building. Our kids are even more vulnerable. Research shows that when you hit a child going 30 miles an hour, the child will probably die. If you hit a child going 15 miles an hour, they have a chance of survival. If we vaccinate our kids against measles and hepatitis, why don't we vaccinate them against the thing that's most likely to kill them? The vaccine is low speeds. Cities that are lowering their speed limits to 25 miles an hour, like New York and Boston, are seeing more people come home safely. But not everyone likes speed vaccines. In fact, half of our states are raising their speed limits. Why? This is part of why we recently saw a spike in fatalities unlike anything we've seen in over 50 years. What was that name you said earlier? It might have even been you. That person is one of the 40,000 lives we could save per year and over 2 million injuries we could prevent if we cared just a little bit less about saving a couple seconds on our morning commute and a little bit more about saving people. Roads harbor silent killers, too. Toxic tailpipes are delivering diseases directly into our kids' mouths. Vehicle emissions are choking our cities. Austin is not an exception. 93% of our world's children breathe dirty air. 93%. For kids whose lungs are still developing, this has lifelong consequences like asthma and lung cancer. We're breeding a generation of smokers who never smoked. And those are the kids who live. 300,000 more under the age of 15 die. One doctor in Brazil said, "Give me funding for metro, not coffins." It's not all bad. We can change this. We can get to zero. In fact, it's been done. How? By focusing on our densest population, our cities, and their most vulnerable, our youth. Over half of our population lives in cities where the number of both vehicles and people is growing. It's a recipe for disaster. Car-free zones and low speeds are controversial unless we're talking about school zones. Our child health initiative starts with the journey most kids make every day to school. It's a global game changer. Vision Zero for Youth is just one of our many initiatives. We're doing it in Mexico City, where most kids walk to school, often with a grandparent, often from low and middle income families. You have the two most vulnerable populations doing the most dangerous but necessary thing, walking. Our partner recognized that it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes an entire community to protect them. From students to janitors, they involved the whole school community in doing Vision Zero for Youth. I actually went to do a media interview, but the real star of the show was a student, Hafida. Pointing to the crosswalk behind her, she said to the newscaster, "I did that. We did that." Vision Zero for Youth isn't just building infrastructure, it's building bridges from empowerment to change to zero. Remember Nancy and her daughter, Laura? Their hometown of Bogota, Colombia also embraced Vision Zero for Youth. With our partner, the city created cycling school buses so kids can cycle safely to school in groups. Thanks to the mayor and his team, the city actually celebrated its first December last year with 0 child fatalities on its roads. 0 is possible. In Fortaleza, Brazil, our partner kicked out the cars and brought in the kids. In a matter of hours, they transformed a main avenue with paint, planters, and benches. More kids spent time outside, more people spent time outside, because streets that are safe for kids are safe for everyone. In Dar es Salaam, there's a school where 1 child lost his life and 8 were injured in just 1 year. With the community, our partner brought in sidewalks and speed bumps, and injury rates dropped. Safer streets mean healthier kids. 81% of the world's adolescents don't get enough exercise. When kids are confined to the walls of their homes, obesity levels go up because of unsafe roads. Safe streets can change that, bringing kids outside to walk and cycle and play and just be children. And our kids are demanding change. In Bangladesh last year, when 2 students were killed by a speeding bus, they took to the streets chanting, "We want justice." Kids actually inspected cars for safety. The capital was at a standstill. Schools were closed. because they were empty. American kids fought too. In New York City, when they cut the speed camera program last year, kids protested and held a 24-hour vigil. Speed cameras are actually a really big reason why the city experienced a 5-year straight decrease in its fatalities. You remember that name you said earlier? Speed cameras could be the difference between life and death for that one person. So the day before 1 million kids went back to school, the mayor reinstated the cameras, putting kids before cars in our most populous city. Our kids demand to be heard. They're being the change they wish to see in the world. But that's not their job. That's our job. At the FIA Foundation, we're upholding that moral obligation. We have a vision to get to 0. We know 0 is the only acceptable number. And we all have a role to inoculate our youth against this preventable plague. We have to ask our leaders, to demand of our leaders that they do their job and protect our kids. Let's ask them to look our kids in the eyes and tell them how much their lives are worth. Can you imagine a leader saying to a child, "We have the vaccine. You don't deserve it." They'd be voted out of office. We're asking leaders to come together at the United Nations and prioritize the generation that will benefit our society for decades to come, our youth. UN summits have worked in the past, and it's time they worked for our future. It's time for road traffic crashes and other neglected areas of adolescent health, like mental health and obesity, to follow in the footsteps of traditional diseases and get the funding and resources they deserve. These issues are core to our cities. UN summits have worked in the past. Again, they have to work for our future. I have one final ask. Today, I'm asking you to lend your voice to the kids who are literally dying to be heard. I'm asking you to go to mystreet.org and become an ally. Together, let's tell our kids, we have the cure, and you know what? You're worth it. One day we can be like Hafida. We can point to the epidemic on wheels we eradicated and say, I did this. We did this. We can get to 0. Let's do it together. On behalf of all the kids you'll save, thank you.